Lascavo Prosimo. Welcome all to the latest update on the Resilient Village project, specializing in low-cost, locally designed and built solutions to living resiliently in the midst of war. 2 years of volunteering, researching, planning, and building relationships throughout Ukraine and neighboring nations. These are just brief highlights of the current work and the foundation being laid for shaping the future. The first Resilient Village project finally broke ground this past winter in the liberated village region between Bucha, suburb of Kyiv, and the Chernobyl exclusion zone just below Belarus. This is where the Russian tank column, determined to capture Kyiv in a few days, was demolished, the first major victory following the full-scale invasion. The tanks were destroyed by Ukrainians, by the army, by territorial defense, and by many of these villagers. But it came at a high price, in damage, destruction, terror, despair, loss of lives, loss of livelihood, but determination to continue, to never give up. For me, it's the greatest honor and privilege to work alongside such freedom fighters. Arca Stikosti, Arch Resilience. This has become our symbol, not just for innovative housing, but for resilience, and a comprehensive plan for a rapid, locally driven recovery in hard-hit rural communities throughout Ukraine. In January, using lumber from struggling local sawmills, our team designed and built these unique arch trusses, roof and wall components pre-built to greatly speed up construction of permanent, resilient housing and other structures. The bonus was bringing life back to a battle-damaged factory, our first multi-purpose Razom Center. Razom means together in Ukrainian, so together with a team of 3, the factory owner and construction workers, we laid plans for the future while tackling the demands of the present. The research and development going on at this R&D center resulted in the first Ukrainian structure of its type, designed for wartime resilience. It quickly gained international attention in Israel, America, and Moldova, beginning the first steps toward an international business, with the potential to become a much welcomed income source for the project, the local economy, and Ukraine. This is the plan. As I seek a location where war debris from destroyed villages can be recycled into the finishing materials for the well-engineered arch framework itself. I hope to take the work back to Kharkiv, where I spent the first winter after the full-scale invasion, working on the other high priority for Resilient Village, constructing and testing an off-grid heating system for a nation at war, also using recycled war debris. The image in the bottom right corner is from what many consider to be the best information on rocket mass heating, or RMH, system technology. Ernie and Erica Wisner, 2 of the world's leading experts, are constantly improving RMH and wood heating technology to share with the world. Ernie was instrumental in helping me design the best variations for Ukraine's needs. We will all benefit from the many hours of free consultation that he devoted to helping the Ukrainian cause. More on this later. In this video, we'll be looking at these and other ways that we together can survive this brutal war resiliently while laying the foundation for the rebirth of a free and strong Ukraine. So, what is the need that the Resilient Village addresses? You see here just a small selection, snapshots from media around the world, a glimpse at the destruction growing day by day. Thousands of war-torn villages deserted or with a handful of people refusing to leave. Many pockets of determined survivors remain. These are the most vulnerable villagers, the ones who have very limited personal resources to relocate and to receive very little help beyond basic survival needs at this point in the war. They get emergency supplies, but little help to stabilize their homes, infrastructure, livelihood, or to evacuate well. Enter Resilient Village with your help. Not a day goes by that Ukraine isn't under fierce attack, which can happen randomly, beyond the front lines, anywhere in Ukraine, a nation nearly the size of Texas. This continually creates more and more mountains of rubble, where once there were quaint, colorful, lovingly built cottages. Now, only silent gray heaps of destruction and death, sometimes littered with Russian bodies, remains. The stories are even more heartbreaking. In the upper right corner, the New York Times shares the story about 98-year-old Lydia, who walked alone for nearly 10 kilometers, crossing the front line under enemy fire in slippers, with a splintered old board for a cane. Despite falling, losing consciousness, Lydia repeatedly lifted herself and persevered to reach free Ukraine. But the house that Lydia built with her own hands is destroyed. Still, she's one of the fortunate few. Her story touched many. A bank stepped forward to give her a new house. Lydia's reunited with family. I've met dozens of these incredibly resilient village babusias, the Ukrainian word for babushka. Many in their 80s, 90s, even over 100 years old. Last year, I was invited to join a team of Ukrainians from Kyiv who regularly bring emergency supplies to the region where the first resilient village takes shape. These dear babusias constantly gave us precious gifts from the garden or handmade crafts, invitations to stay for home-cooked, fresh-from-the-garden meals, or even staying overnight at some of their picturesque homes. Like living in a fairy tale, I slept in a bed once, carved out of the side of a huge old masonry wood stove. Some peaceful day in the near future, I can see international tourists flocking to these villages. I know it will happen. It's written in the Resilient Village plans. Dwindling pockets of elderly now work much of the day in the gardens, feeding the chickens, the goats, the dogs, the cats, drawing clear, cold water from their well. No easy task, I discovered. Getting around with their canes and walkers, in the kitchen processing the produce that they will be storing up for winter. Whatever is necessary to stave off starvation and despair. These Ukrainians are survivors, fiercely independent, determined to preserve the homestead and their way of life. Villages struggling to remain idyllic in the middle of a war forced upon their nation. Often they are the only ones left in these villages, these elderly women, a few men, who never thought they'd have to endure once again anything like the Great Patriotic War, World War II. Some saying this is the worst of the two. But do you notice something else in these photos? Construction lumber, bricks, broken concrete, roofing, ducting, doors, windows, many old, unique, beautifully ornate samples of Ukrainian culture. The raw materials for rebuilding without the prohibitive price tags. With creative recycling, researching new methods, and off-grid technology, These piles of rubble can become the neighborhood home construction centers, catalysts to jumpstart the rebuilding process. Building back better than before with visioneering and a whole lot of out-of-the-box thinking, something at which many young Ukrainians are extremely adept. Such thinking doesn't come easily for many in this part of the world, but necessity, brought on by war, has become the mother of incredible inventions, and there is a whole lot of overwhelming necessity that just needs a nudge in the right direction. For Resilient Village, the plan is to build bridges with villagers and humanitarian organizations to build permanent, safe, holistic communities right here in Ukraine, starting right now, for the most vulnerable populations, those forced to leave their destroyed villages. That remains the goal 2 years into this project. It's taken a painfully long time to get this far. However, Resilient Village and I are here for the remainder of my retirement years. Hopefully, the project will soon be rapidly expanding with more than just my pension to support the work. Either way, this critical work will continue despite the ongoing conflict. It must continue. Staying behind. Given the recent intense attacks on villages north of Kharkiv, current focus is to come alongside villagers with farm animals and pets, and birds, a particular favorite of mine, which are largely ignored by humanitarian groups seeking to save human life. However, these beloved companions and livestock for survival are often the reasons these villagers refuse to leave. Let me share some of this story from the Kyiv Independent. For 65-year-old railway worker Serhiy Kotsar, there is almost nothing left to remain attached to. The house behind him, where he was born and grew up, took a direct hit from a Russian gliding bomb. His wife was immediately evacuated to hospital in Kharkiv, but Kotsar himself, despite everything, chooses to stay put. In a rusty shack behind the house, singed and shaken, lies the reason why. Kotsar's goats cry out as he strokes their heads gently. To one side, a small tabby cat, badly burnt but still alive, meows softly. "I can't bring myself to kill them with my own hands," he said, holding back tears. With police and volunteers usually refusing to evacuate livestock, these animals create another reason for people like Kotsar to stay. The lucky ones are heading to friends and family elsewhere in Ukraine or abroad, but those without support networks of their own will have to search for programs to complement the meager financial support received from the state. And please check out the video story that these screenshots were taken from. I'll be posting all the links mentioned here and in the other slides in the description for this YouTube video. This is a familiar slide to many of you who have seen my previous presentations. So I'll give just a brief overview of where Resilient Village is now, after more than 2 years of living and working in Ukraine and Eastern Europe. I've recently returned to Ukraine from 3 months in Moldova. This time, instead of just chaining myself to my computer, I walked over to the nearby America House, where I received a very warm welcome and gained new friends. Established by our government, these centers are open to the public, featuring a wealth of free resources on American culture, education, politics, history, economy, and democratic traditions. The center in Kishinev invited me to give a workshop on building personal resilience, part of the Resilient Village concept, but more about that later. Now I'm back in Kyiv, getting the word out to a wider audience about the Resilient Village work and the need to build bridges to partners who can take different components of the plan to benefit their own work, where we can work together for the benefit of all. Hopefully, I'll be able to share resilient concepts, especially with young people at the America House here in Kyiv. Together, we'll create a more unified approach to stand strong, even in wartime, but on through the peacetime to come. Together, we can build a stronger foundation for the new Ukraine. Resilient Village building blocks. Let's take a closer look at the essential components of a resilient village and how it's taking shape, finally 2 years after the initial concept paper was created. The photos here are from a small village near our Arch Truss factory. You can see some of our ladies cleaning recycled bricks to renovate the buildings that would soon become their very own church. Beyond the buildings and garden is the large, unused part of the property, purchased last year by the Kyiv team that I've worked with help from me and my American followers. This location could be used to build 30 or more tiny homes with common areas and a Razom center. As these incredibly resilient ladies show, it's the villagers themselves who are the true building blocks for a resilient village. Ukrainian-owned and Ukrainian-run, helping one another in their common language. This is the essential part that has been missing these first 2 years and has resulted in such slow progress. So, our typical resilient village will consist of a group of tiny, well-built homes and a larger, multi-purpose Razom center. All of this within a thoughtfully designed, custom-made community setting, with private as well as common use spaces for gardens, farm animals, activity areas, so many potential purposes, as you can see on the screen, for the Razom Center itself. Whatever the community members and local governing body agree upon. The homes are designed to avoid reliance on external infrastructure, to be totally self-contained, self-reliant, and off-grid, using well-trusted, easy-to-construct, low-cost technologies for electricity, heat, and wash basics. That's water, sanitation, and hygiene. Resilient Village will use the UN's WASH Cluster standards, recently revised to reflect best practices globally for emergency situations. However, Resilient Village will only use those solutions that are suitable for permanent living standards. Each resilient village will be based on permaculture practices. In the ideal permaculture system, everything is recycled. There is no such thing as waste. The goal is a closed-loop system, patterned after natural ecosystems, for a cleaner, more resilient lifestyle in line with better global and EU standards. Most communities should be located near the less contaminated war debris sites. Many of the materials, the building blocks, to build the community will be recyclable items from these locations, thus cleaning up war debris by recycling as much as possible in the rebuilding process. Ukraine has the horrific task, but also the tremendous opportunity to rebuild many of its small communities from the ground up. It is truly a rebirth of the nation that we face. And the world is watching. Let's be the ones to carve a path leading the world towards this logical, ecological lifestyle that we all need to embrace. Rocket mass heating systems. Even now in the heat of summer, we need to prepare for the prospect of a third winter with damaged infrastructure, still under attack throughout the nation. So we'll revisit the first winter's priority for Resilient Village, introducing the rocket mass heating, or RMH system. Now we have tiny homes started and an R&D center to test and build and share the knowledge so that homeowners and groups throughout Ukraine can build their own systems, even using recycled war debris for much of it. In the photos on the right, typical construction material, even the fire bricks in some locations, can be found amidst the war debris, or around the land, in the gardens and forests that make up most village properties. The exterior finish, called cob, is simply sand, clay, water, and straw, all of which are common in rural settings. I found that many villages, still have artisans skilled in these building techniques. We just have slightly different applications for them to sink their hands and sometimes feet into. Even smaller pieces of firewood typically used by RMH systems, as shown in the bottom center photo, can usually be pruned or gleaned around the property. No purchase needed. The graph between the two firewood photos shows that one heating season might use only 1/10 of the firewood of a typical wood-burning stove. However, the comparisons are based on modern units common in America, generally much more efficient than the older village systems. Last winter, the Kyiv team bought a winter's worth of firewood for each of their 60-plus adopted babushkas. With their enchanting old masonry heaters, like the one I'm standing next to in the photo on the far left. Cost $200 to $300 US to heat each house for one season. Potentially, many of these same homes using RMH systems instead could be fed with pruned and gathered firewood tidbits or other biomass at no cost every year. Then add the war's impact. Ukraine desperately needs this off-grid technology. RMH systems represent a rapidly growing state-of-the-art technology for extremely efficient wood or biomass heating, a renewable resource based on more ecologically sound developments in recent years than the original rocket heaters, still sold by Ukrainian street vendors. No comparison, really. It's kind of like the difference between firecrackers and the space shuttle. However, once these innovative Ukrainians get a hold of this updated technology, I have every confidence they'll come up with even more game-changing improvements. Maybe Ukrainians will also invent a new name, Frankenstoves. Maybe not. The beauty of these systems is that they can be built by average homeowners. As soon as we spread the knowledge to the wider Ukrainian audience, homeowners across the country could start building their own heating systems immediately, cheaply, in a matter of days, and not just heating. As time permits, we'll return to the broader plan for the R&D centers. Off-grid solutions for electricity, water, sewage, and other parts of the infrastructure, now completely destroyed in hundreds, if not thousands, of villages. This is my hope and prayer for the winter 2024 in Ukraine. It's also been the dream of several citizen scientists at Permies.com, a globally active grassroots information sharing group, some of them dreaming of better heat for Ukraine since the invasion. They know what a difference it can make for Ukrainians struggling to survive winter. During the early months of 2023, I was invited by the Ukrainian Army to a training site to build prototypes for several variations of these off-grid systems, ones that could be used by soldiers along the front lines. 3 problems. 1. After days of heavy rains, we arrived to find our team of recruits busy in a bucket brigade, unsuccessfully trying to bail out the trench we were assigned. 2. Meanwhile, our Army engineer was unimpressed with the simplicity of RMH's design. 3. The Army's priority also turned out to be for a more portable system, one that could be used in trench warfare for troops that were constantly on the move. The work needed to return to an independent format once again. But the time in the training trench also opened up many possibilities for testing a wide array of improvements for the well-being of our soldiers. It's incredible what they've been going through in this trench warfare that we thought that nightmare disappeared with World War I. It's alive and well and very much in Ukraine. With Ernie Wisner's help, as I mentioned earlier, and the freely shared knowledge of rocket heating scientists at Permies.com, I now have several variations, including recently improved portable models to test, as soon as we get the first working village started. With our arch truss homes ideally suited for this type of heating, we will finally succeed before this third winter sets in. Returning to Kharkiv that first winter, I began to construct the first fire brick furnace component, the fire-breathing heart of the RMH systems. The test was successful, despite having to build it outdoors in the worst winter weather of that season. During this time, I was a regular customer at the Epicenter store there in the Saltivka area, which had suffered great damage earlier in the invasion. There was a very helpful store manager who made it possible to gather nearly all needed components through his store. Just a 10-minute walk from my home base and test site, a vital consideration when you don't have a vehicle. These Epicenter stores are very much like Loaves and Home Depot in America, and just as large and busy on a Saturday. That's when the glide bomb hit a few weeks ago. Secondary explosions from all the volatile stock utterly destroyed the complex, killing a number of people inside, including 2 children. I have a personal stake in this region and hope to partner with organizations that are aiding in the current evacuations to begin helping villagers who are once again facing incredibly difficult situations as their villages become active battlefields. These affordable off-grid solutions for rural communities in particular can and should be saving lives. We must spread the word quickly. Join with us to put these practical solutions into the hands of the people that need it most. Outreach to the military. As I give you a bit of my background and reasons for my strong commitment to helping our Ukrainian military, please take a little time to check out the pictures and descriptions that are on this slide. Since 2005, my passion in life has centered around my career as an emergency manager, an extensive volunteer experience, all in the fields of disaster, in response, in training, logistics, home repair and rebuilding, debris removal and recycling, serving in emergency operations centers, as chaplain and vulnerable population specialist, often in very remote, primitive settings. During much of this time, I had opportunities to work alongside the military, especially in the field, during disaster responses. Throughout the U.S., the Virgin Islands, Haiti, humanitarian outreaches in remote parts of Tajikistan's Pamir Mountains, along a very porous border with Afghanistan, even after the fall of the Afghan government. Far more time spent chained to various desks in the tamer parts of my careers, with Red Cross, with FEMA, our Federal Emergency Management Agency that oversees presidentially declared the big disasters in America, and as Washington, D.C. federal contractor, serving briefly as an IT operations manager at the Pentagon, and alongside the National Guard as we transitioned to civilian-run COVID clinics through a state emergency management agency. Through it all, I've been privileged to work alongside members from various branches of the U.S. military, UN peacekeeping forces, and soldiers of other nations. Veterans who also served as FEMA reservists like myself, or as volunteers with a number of disaster response groups, including Team Rubicon, which was created to retool the skills of military veterans for civilian disaster response work, an idea that I hope we'll be exploring for our Ukrainian veterans. Now, meeting many of the Ukrainian soldiers gives me even more reason to meet their needs, whatever ways possible. Village Emergency Response Teams. Many Ukrainian villages, out of necessity, have already implemented some of the principles I'll share, but I'm sure they have even more ideas to add to this body of knowledge so that it continues to grow and become an ever more useful tool. I look forward to sharing it with fellow American emergency managers and responders. The risk of war and appropriate responses to it is not covered in our otherwise excellent civilian guidance for responding to emergencies in the U.S. This is not a topic that can just be left to the military. Here in Ukraine, a less tangible aspect of this ongoing brutal war is the mental and emotional toll it takes on every person in the country, not to mention refugees abroad and all those involved in helping the war effort and reporting on it. Thanks to all of you for battling hard truths, which many choose to ignore. As part of building or expanding village emergency response teams, I've been gathering resources from respected experts in disaster and wartime survival, including what's known as psychological first aid. These time-tested, field-tested principles and techniques are now widely applied by crisis interventionists, police and fire departments, disaster chaplains, the United Nations, the American Red Cross, and so many other disaster and emergency response groups around the world. Many have certified training of the International Critical Incident Stress Foundation, ICISF, whose guidance is one of the main underpinnings of the UN's stress management training for their staff. Many of the basic principles and training came out of the U.S. military and continue for militaries across the world today. I'm not a professional in psychology, although I've invested hundreds of hours in targeted training, earning more than 50 certifications. It's the strength of applying these principles in over 8,000 working hours, as best as I can calculate, of boots on the ground disaster and now wartime response that gives me the motivation and confidence to share these skills. I do my best to add meat to the bones of the theory so that I can share with you easy to digest guidance that has really helped me over the years. Simple nuggets of wisdom that stick with you as you build your own resilience and go on to help others. Expanding this idea and drawing on other ideas in action globally and in Ukraine, we'll be able to partner locally to help grow or expand community emergency response teams and those they serve, to benefit ourselves and those around us. I hope these infographic slides are providing a meaningful way to share the complexity of the evolving resilient village concept. I'll be expanding on these slides in future videos, since each one represents just a small sampling of the broad range of topics covered in a holistic approach to rebuilding smaller communities. For now, these YouTube videos provide the most current information as we retool the rest of the social media and the website. However, I hope you'll reach out to me personally to discuss possible ways we can help each other expanding Ukrainian resilience in war, but especially in the peace to come. I really look forward to partnering soon with some of the many great people, some of you, here in Ukraine, helping the freedom-loving freedom fighters of Ukraine. Slava Ukraine!